So we're going to begin with a copy of this Winslow Homer. And what we're going to do to start is the pencil line that he would have used to draw the major image. So what we can see happening is that we have this horizon line that's kind of cutting through the center of the composition, roughly. And that's where the sky and the water meet. And then off to this side, you can see just going off the page, we have this boat kind of curving in the foreground. We have this kind of large boat element working its way almost to the beyond midpoint of the composition, working its way up towards the horizon, not quite. Then there's a second, like a kind of a dory boat that does make its way to the horizon. So we'll delineate that out a little bit. And we're going to then work our way over and kind of above the horizon to the bow of the boat. And what we'll do is we'll start to look at some of the line work of mast off of the mast. The mast is kind of coming in like this at an angle. Okay, then we have off of the mast the beam sail like this. That's going to work its way back. And then off to this side, we have, as you can see, the boat hanging off of another boat right near the horizon, kind of coming down and cutting across. And this boat is in the foreground with its figures. You can see a person over in here, another person looking out, and some rigging that's coming down. Believe it or not, Winslow Homer, in terms of the amount of drawing, would have just done some basic shape drawing, and he would have been most accurate with his drawing around the areas that he wanted the white paper to show. So you can see pencil line right through here where he wants this sail to come along and curl and then go under and come up to this point here, that little curve of shape. He would have drawn that in. He would have drawn in the curve of the bow of the ship coming up. He would have drawn in some of this ship in the distance that's way back here. He would have drawn in the horizon. He would not have drawn in all the ripples in the foreground where the light is hitting. He would not have worried about drawing in all of the shadow ripples over here. Those would have been just painted in terms of the overall shape. So you can see the drawing would have been quite simple. And what he's really concerned with is those shapes of white. We need to work around our white as we isolate. And so then we're also going to think about places that we can break in terms of our painting. We talk about these as places where we can take a break. So for instance, if I'm going to paint around this white sail here, I'm going to use the blue of the sky to do that. And the blue of the water is going to cut around the boat. And if we think about it, we have the blue of the sky on this side working around the clouds. That comes up to this sail here. And then when we get to the mast, it stops. So we can actually work on this side separate from this side because the mast is cutting through all of it. And so we're going to think about those as places where we can have one color stop and another color start, or places where we can have joints happen. We're going to think about all those things that we can plan ahead in terms of where can I put the joints in this piece. Now there's another figure over here. There's some dark shapes in the boat as well. We'll just kind of give them a little indication to help us figure that out as we go along. So as we also look at the image, we can see that the sky blue color is more of a cobalt blue. It's a little bit more purpley blue in color, and we can see that on the palette over here. There's our cobalt. Let's charge that up with some water. We also might be looking at what we call ultramarine blue. Ultramarine is another blue that has a little bit more of a purpley undertone, and that's the blue that we see happening in the sky. It's either a cobalt or an ultramarine. Whereas when we look at the blue that's being used in the water area, we can see that that's definitely a cerulean blue, which is this color here. It's much more blue-green. Or another blue that's really excellent for this would be phthalo blue. And I'm looking for phthalo blue on my palette. I don't see it, but I do have it in paint form. on another palette that I can bring over. And what we have is this here. So this is more of a phthalo. So this is a nice better version of phthalo that I have found. I'll squeeze a little bit out right there. And a lot of you will be able to see that this has that green undertone that we can see that's happening in his water. Okay, and if we thin that out, phthalo is a very strong blue. But if we thin that out, we can start to approach the color that we see happening more in the water versus the sky. Now, in terms of the sky, we have a cloud formation over here that kind of comes through the middle. Okay, and then we have one on this side that peaks its way over to here, and then a little bit in the top. So at this point, we're ready to get started. What I'm going to do is charge up some ultramarine blue, and I'm going to get it ready. Now, what I'm a believer in is this. Charge that color up until it's really saturated and what you feel is oversaturated. Bring it to your secondary palette and work some water into it. And if we want, we can go over to our area here where we have some scrap paper and we can give it a test. That's clearly darker than I need for the sky. So now what I'm going to do is add water until I lighten that up to the amount that I want. So I'm a believer that you first put the color down on your palette with some saturation and then lighten it up to the level that you'd like. Okay, once you have it to the level that you'd like, what we're going to do is we're going to take some clean water and we're going to kind of dabble it around the cloud area, the shape that we want to build. I'm not going to make mine exactly like his. I'll make it close. Now I'm thinking about this. These figures and this boat is silhouetted against the sky. So I don't have to worry about that touching there because I'm going to cover that up with work. So again, clean water. I'm going to kind of put it down where this cloud is going to create its edge. And I'm going to put some clean water over here where this cloud lives. And then I'm going to come through with my blue and I'm going to work it in between those shapes. As I touch that water, what we remember is that water meeting color is going to make a bleed, and that's going to create the feeling of a blurry edge. And so one of the features of Winslow Homer's work is the way that he danced the brush. He would kind of work it and move the color really fluidly. Now, in terms of the mast and the sail, I'm going to make sure I go around the mast and the sail. And I'm going to bring that color around everything that's white, but not worry about things that aren't. I'm going to just let that blue fill everything else except the areas that are white. Working it this way, I'm going to stop at the mast. I'm going to bring that blue down into the sky here. And you can see I'm really pushing that puddle around and moving that color into place, finding the sky shape, allowing it to dance through. I can go back and get some more blue and darken it up in here and darken it up in here and then bring it down. And again, I'm letting the dry paper form the shape of that sail on the mast as it comes down towards the water line, cutting across. Now Homer let that blue kind of go all the way down and actually come right to the edge of this boat and right to the edge where the water and the sky meet. And then he stopped right at the mast, right over here. That mast becomes a stopping point for the sky on two halves. Over here, you notice the sky gets painted right under these figures because we don't really need to worry about those in the sense that they're darker than the sky, so we'll paint them right on top. And then he would have cleaned the brush but used a little bit of blue, and you can see him kind of letting the blue come up into this corner so that it's not too white over there. He didn't want the white to be everywhere in the cloud. He wanted the cloud to be sort of slightly white on that left side. Moving the other direction, again with clean water, we're going to start and we're going to just sort of go around where the cloud shape should be. We'll make ours a little different. We're going to be very careful around the sail. That's the shape of white. We need to carve around that shape of white. But regardless of that, everything else is going to be blue. And so then let's go get the blue. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to carve around our white like this. We're going to create kind of a border of where we want that shape to be, like that. We're going to cut it in underneath here too. Right up to the bow of the ship and kind of down into here. You can see him sort of putting this shape in. And then we're going to take that blue and go from the cloud down and let it meet this little border line where it's bordered off the edge of that sail so that it carves that edge right out. Again, I'm using that border as almost a moat to make sure that that paint stays up in the sky area and not down into that white sail. We're going to pick up our bead when we need to, making sure that it doesn't disturb what's around it. And we've started the process of kind of carving away and isolating our form of the boat. At this point, you can sort of pause and give yourself time to think. Winslow Homer probably would have taken some blue from the sky color and brought it down into this boat space here. He would not have worried about the blue going there because, again, that can be covered up with more work. Fairly quickly, he would have used the water color of the ocean water, and that would have come up and touched the sky, worked under this boat in the background, carved right around the ship. And then it would have done this with these little highlights. He would have just danced the brush where those highlights are forming. Working our way down towards the foreground. You can see him putting some water down on this side to make it a little lighter, and then back to the color of the ocean. And it would have done this side as well, a few little dances of the brush to give this feeling of the reflection of the front of that boat in the water. Right up to the edge of the land, very carefully around these two ship shapes there. And again, with the color of the ocean, not worrying about the boat to the left, we would bring that right down and quickly through this lower space. So we talk about isolating our white shape. Everything that's going to stay white in the picture, we isolate by putting down some base color around it. Anything that we can do in that first color set around the areas that we want white. So I've done that in the cloud. I've left some blurry edge to the cloud. You can see that Homer may have gone in and even worked that a little bit with the brush to give it that blurriness. And we also come up to the edge of the sail. We leave the sail dry and we bring our color down to it wet. And then we, again, go around the dry boat, bringing our wet color down, adding water as we come to the bottom. He would have added water to give that slightly lighter feel to this bottom foreground down in there. And so very quickly, we isolate the shape of that boat in terms of its whiteness. And we use the color of the sky and the color of the sea in order to start to construct that. So with that being said, let me ask if there's, okay, we're back. And so we're back at a point now where what we can do is start to construct the next layer of things. And so what Homer would have done is look for the next lightest color in the composition. And what we have are some of these lighter grays and grays that are building these little shadow shapes and areas of detail within the midground of the painting. We also can see some use of that back in here as well, some grays that indicate some of the distant islands in the distance. And so Homer would have moved to those next lightest colors. And what gets interesting is that you can see how he created gray by looking at the mast, which is kind of a burnt sienna color. And then you can also see the mixture of blue creating a gray. So if I go over to burnt sienna, which is over here, and I bring some up like this, you can see that's the exact color, something in there, either a red or a burnt sienna in the color of the mast. So he would have done that next. That light color of the mast coming through. It's kind of a pinkish red right through there. And it would work its way down into the bottom. And you can see him lightening that up. And this boat in the distance had a glaze of that red-brown back in here. He would have taken probably the same exact red-brown, burnt sienna, and mixed it into the blue to create some of these grays that he's going to use in other areas of the painting, because that's a concept of painting that we like to use, which is let colors come together and work in teams. And so we'll take that gray that we just made and we'll start to block in the basic shape of this little dory boat that's on the edge of the white ship. We'll block that in. You can see there's some shadow on the mast itself. It comes across like this. And from underneath. Giving that a little bit of depth. There's that cast shadow that turns right through here and cuts up in terms of the sail. It's all about warm and cool here, and he's using really kind of a cool, warm set of grays. You can see that gray coming down like this, getting lighter underneath. And then you can see it kind of goes warmer as well from here down and more or less cutting into the bow of the ship for that shadow shape there. Sometimes he'd do a little wipeout to pull it back and make it less dark. You can even see maybe a little bit of use of kind of a gray into the cloud a little bit. And some of the little details in the sail over on this side. Of course, the boat itself back here has some stuff on it. So we'll start to build that with kind of a gray, and we'll find the edge of the side of the ship moving this way. We can see some of the people inside of it. He would have then put the shadow on the mast. You can see a little bit of the same gray used in the water right here. to define the edge of the ship. And then he would have gone for a much darker version by adding more blue, more burnt sienna, more blue. And this is going to start the process of finding these foreground shapes of the boat. And because the paper is dry, I can work this foreground boat in right on top of everything. That figure, this figure looking out, and basically putting my base tone of gray down. And working our way down, you can see that same kind of blue-gray color being worked into this bit of a wave off the ship here, and this kind of working it this way. Remember, side-to-side brush mode works. We want side-to-side now as he brings it down through this foreground space. And so you can see that whole foreground just gets kind of laid in with a base tone. See if I get rid of the glare of this lamp here, you can kind of see what we're doing a little better. Let me see if I can aim that lamp a little more to the side and give us a better view. You can see all these base colors are meant to sort of establish the overall undertone of what we're working with in terms of our subject. Notice that when we put color down, we don't leave it alone. We sort of play with it as we go along. The same gray, I'm going to go back and grab a little bit more of it, because what we're going to do is we're going to pop in a little bit of a darkening of this shadow here. We're going to pop in a little bit darker shadow here, because after all, the shadow should be darker right under the object. Okay, and we have a figure in here that's going to start to work the boat. We'll talk about that in a minute. I'm going to build more to the mast of the ship. We've got other figures underneath the sail over here. And so we can see what Homer does is he goes back to the sky color and he actually uses it to define this whole underside of the boat like that. And again, now we have to wait. All of this color is wet. So while it's wet, we might be able to do something like this. We take a little bit of kind of a red brown and we can find the depth on the mast coming down and under. So we're sort of strategizing. What can I paint and what can't? What do I have to wait for and what can I do with more color and more layers? So the painting is at this interesting middle stage where the color is sort of happening at the same time as it's building up. It's also still in its light phase. And all of the darkest colors are really going to set the final painting off. It's really where everything's going to finally jump. It's going to be in those last layers. So we'll stay with these subtle things and we'll do something like this. We'll take a mixture of these two. And now we'll come in and find that little bit of that land mass that's in the distance. It's a little bit darker right there. We can actually see that extending out here in the really distant space. And Homer would have gone back to his color of the ocean water. And some of you can see that there's a few brush strokes just in the most foreground zone to make that water feel like it's coming towards us. So there's a little bit of texture right through there. And again, we're going to hair dry it at this point. Now, I'm really not a ship person, so I don't know exactly about ships and how they're put together as much as Winslow Homer would have. It looks like he really understood the rigging of a ship and all of those sorts of things. So I'm going to just kind of do my best to follow along with what I'm seeing, but I'm sure that he would have done something with a little bit more knowledge of how it would have all gone together. So if we look at this image, we've started with our white, isolating our white, and we're doing so with our next lightest colors, the grays and the blues. And then we're creeping up on our darker grays by laying them in masses and undertones. And we're going to go from there. So now we continue the process of working from light to dark. We're trying to kind of systematically go from light to dark. And so the next dark value would be some of the value that we see in a secondary gray in these kind of middle zones. So you can see the way he's defining the shape of the boat. I'm going to use a sharper brush at this point. And what I'm going to do is come up to a color that's a darker color to begin with. That's going to be this sepia brown, or you could use burnt umber as a color, which is going to be a darker brown. And if I work burnt umber with ultramarine blue, I'm going to get much darker grays, as you can see. And I can change them between cool and warm depending on what I want to do with how much blue or how much brown I have in the mixture. So I'm going to go for something a little bit kind of in the middle warm zone like this. And we're going to see, for instance, the shape of this dory would have been finding its tone and its curve of the bow or the back of it there. One little stroke. Finding this little line of shadow underneath it. Letting that work right into the cast shadow on the side of the ship like this. It sort of cast a little shadow down and under. I take the same mixture and I start defining the other side of it. Carving around. Working into here. And what you can start to see is that there's a figure in this boat. And we start to notice that figure based on its shape. And it looks like it has kind of burnt umber legs. And then there's another figure kind of hiding under here in the shadows. And so with these accent points of color, these darker colors that we can find, it helps us to carve out the edge of the boat and make the edge of the boat pop and come forward from everything else. It's going to go right under to the sail. And so it's giving all this detail to this section of the boat. Back to that middle area here. We have this figure with his head right up here. And some accent points throughout the sail space. And we can see that same, we need to go for our same darker mixes. Either burnt umber or sepia brown with blue. A lot more pigment, less water. We're going to make for darker mixes. And you can see that Homer's coming in here and defining the strength of this person's silhouette. this guy up here that's reaching out, and the strength of that silhouette. And how that comes down, and it really defines the shape of the way that this boat works in with the other. This one sits here. There's a brush stroke here for like the kind of side of the boat. So you can see that's allowing, all those shapes are allowing this to pop out. He's using a couple of thin lines in here to draw the boat, even the rigging around his arm. And again, using that super dark color, we can see the loops of rigging down through here. I'd go a little darker with this guy under there, make him a little stronger. There's kind of this, I would say, slightly gray color, and he puts it in a few accent points here and here. He stretches what feels like a rigging off here to the front of the boat. And another one with some very quick strokes. There's some rigging that comes off of this part of the boat with a quick stroke. And if we then, again, we're going to take that color in the brush. We're going to keep it quite dry so that we have a lot of control. And we're going to sweep some rigging down from the top toward this guy's arm. I wouldn't call it dry brush, but it's a lot drier in these long strokes here. And then the loops we see in the rigging that he draws in. So again, this is where I wish I knew a little bit more about boats to do this painting, because I'm sure there's people that know exactly how rigging should go to make it work. I know my cousin is actually a boat rigger, so he knows exactly how to do this stuff. You can see the same, again, with a very dry brush, the same kind of strokes of rigging down through here to the sail, and some in the front as well. It would have come off the mast. And you can see those kind of things happening, building up. There's also one back in here, out to the back sail that would have ended, pulling that like that. And so you can see the silhouette is really starting to come together. And what's missing is a little bit of extra color underneath, and then that red streak that we'll get into at the end. So what we'll do next at this point is we're going to go to this color here. And what Homer did is he went back to this ocean color. He brought in a little bit of cobalt to it, or ultramarine. And the ocean color, he went a bit stronger, and he reinforced these few colors underneath this part of the boat, and he let them kind of drift. So it makes the boat, this boat, stand out of the water below it by darkening that a little bit. And he would have gone in and just allowed this to have a little bit more tone as it came down in there. See some little bit of work back here in this distant ship. And I think we need just a little bit of a darkening under this shadow here, and the kind of sail rigging that works its way up through there like that. Now I'm going to hair dry it yet again. And we're back. So one of the last things Homer would have done is coming in with some of these really amazing strong reds that you can see in a few places that are accent points that have to finish up and give this painting kind of its final accent spaces. So what we can see him using is a cadmium red, a very strong opaque red, and that would have been used for the flag that comes down out of the rigging here. And it would have been just a touch like that of that bright red flag, letting the brush really dance to create the feeling that that flag is floating in the wind. Now you can see right after that, he came in with a very light gray and he found a rigging form that works off of this part of the boat and kind of goes back up toward the mast with some very light gray. And that would have been some of the line work that that little flag attached to. Same cadmium red, but now he's going to darken it with a little bit of ultramarine blue, which is going to make kind of an earthy red color, but quite opaque. And that would have been used down here on the ship for a little stroke across like that. It would have been used in this guy's shirt, bringing that guy so that he carves out the space and defines the bottom of his body as it meets that other boat. He actually used it for another piece of some sort of red cloth that hung off of here. Both above and below. He used it for this guy's with some brighter red with less blue. He went in for this guy's arm, shoulder, and body. And then you can see one final touch was the front of the boat, the red that shows up, that shapes its way at the bow and right across this space. And this would have been done with just the most quick tapering stroke like that, kind of cutting across, defining the whole bottom of how that ship comes into play. Back to the very fine brush would have been the time where he came in and defined all the final rigging of the ship with drawing. So you can see that little bit of the red flag hanging off the side of the ship here, just a little dry brush stroke, kind of coming across like that and like that. And going back to some really light gray, some of the little rigging that we see. Coming in with a very dark black. The last thing we paint are the darkest things to define the edge of these boxes and the way that this box cuts up against the guy, revealing that he's holding something in his hand that we start to see as it's around that leg. And enhancing some of the line work over here, darker. All the detail work is at the end. Drawing the shape of the boat going back, coming in with some of this. And the kind of shape of the bow of this little ship that seems to be ready to be sent off. Some of this rigging at the top. little buckles and turnbuckles. And essentially bringing that last thing. And then really the final thing would have been the name of the ship itself. And you can see he's using kind of a black. Could have been made with blue and orange, but probably also looks to me like it was a black color. And of course, in order to type the name of the ship, which was Lizzie, he has to go around the L. And the I. Z. Z. And you see it sort of indicates the sense of its name in that area there. And so what you see Homer doing is slowly defining this piece from light to dark, building it up in layers upon layers upon layers, getting to a place where the final result is this white ship with the sunlight hitting it up against a silhouetted ship that is against the sky. And in dealing with the silhouetted ship, we can paint that directly on the blue that's underneath, because the blue underneath is just not as strong, so it'll go behind. And meanwhile, the white ship is the one we have to paint around, because if we don't paint around those forms, we'll never see them, they'll be lost. And so the concept of watercolor is quite simple. We want to paint around our shapes of light. We want to constantly use and think about our shapes of white and light, and we want to paint around them as we construct the image, as we build. And so this is really about it. I mean, we could sit and detail all these little parts that we see in the original, but this gives you a great idea to me about how he went about constructing from light to dark and working around the light, surrounding light and slowly darkening the painting, finishing up with your darkest darks at the end. Once we start peeling the tape at the end, again, which is really to me the most fun part of all of this, and we get that nice clean border around the outside, we can really see how it sets off the whole of the composition that we've done.